3. Apollo astronaut finally admits the truth, why we stopped going to the moon. On April 27, 1972, Apollo 16, astronaut Charles Duke became the 10th human being to walk on the surface of the moon, spending over 20 hours on the lunar surface conducting 3 moonwalks. At the time, NASA described Apollo 16 as another major success in a program that had already achieved what once seemed impossible. That's the story we all know. But there's so much more to the Apollo program than that one giant leap. If they had achieved so much, why did it end there? The official explanation for ending the Apollo program has always been budget constraints. But money did not stop us from building space telescopes, launching Mars rovers, or maintaining a permanent station in orbit. So it could be the Vietnam War was expensive, or public interest in moon missions was declining. But Charles Duke, now in his late 80s, with no career left to protect and nothing to gain from silence, has begun sharing a different version of the story. Charles Duke is not a conspiracy theorist, a UFO enthusiast, or someone prone to exaggeration or fantasy. He is one of the most disciplined, credible, and accomplished individuals in the history of human spaceflight. He served as the capsule communicator for Apollo 11, meaning his voice was the one Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin heard from mission control during humanity's first moon landing. When Neil Armstrong said, "The Eagle has landed," that was not just a line. It meant the lunar module had touched down safely after a descent filled with alarms and fuel running dangerously low. Duke responded, "Roger, tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again." That is the level of pressure Duke lived in, and he carried that into everything that came after. Before Apollo 16, he had already trained for the Apollo 13 mission, the mission that almost ended in disaster. An oxygen tank exploded on the way to the moon. So Duke trained knowing that was a real possibility. He understood that space was not exploration. Apollo 16 launched, carrying a crew of 3. John Young was the mission commander, a veteran astronaut who had already flown to the moon once before on Apollo 10. Ken Mattingly was the command module pilot responsible for keeping the spacecraft in lunar orbit while the others descended to the surface. And Charles Duke was the lunar module pilot, the man who would stand beside Young on the moon. 3 highly trained, carefully selected professionals on what was expected to be one of the most scientifically productive missions in the entire Apollo program. The mission objectives were clear and straightforward. Duke and Young were to deploy scientific instruments across the surface to measure moonquakes, solar wind activity, and cosmic radiation. They were also tasked with pushing the lunar rover across more challenging and uneven ground than any earlier crew had attempted, testing both the vehicle and their own ability to navigate difficult terrain. Everything was being monitored from the ground at all times. Every reading from their suits, their oxygen levels, their heart rates, their exact positions on the surface was being tracked in real time by mission control in Houston. The Descartes Highlands were supposed to give humanity a quiet, undisturbed look at the moon's ancient past, predictable geology, known science, and controlled exploration. Roughly 5 hours into their exploration of a flat stretch of terrain known as the Cayley Plains, Duke and Young had already been outside for a long stretch of time. Everything was going exactly as planned, just another routine part of the mission. And then, somewhere ahead on the horizon, something caught Duke's attention. At first, it didn't even register as important, just a visual detail that didn't quite belong. The moon, as they understood it, is supposed to be completely straightforward in how it looks. No atmosphere at all, not even a thin one. That means sunlight hits the surface directly, without scattering or softening. The result is a harsh, unfiltered light. Everything appears sharp and high contrast. Shadows are absolute black. No color shifts, no atmospheric glow, no variation. What you see is exactly what physics predicts. Nothing more and nothing less. And for most of the time outside the spacecraft, that is exactly what Duke experienced. The surface behaved exactly as training had prepared him for. Predictable, silent, controlled. But during the second EVA, as Duke and Young drove the lunar rover deeper into a specific section of the Cayley Plains, something subtle began to stand out. Duke later described it as a change in the quality of light itself. The same white sunlight he had been working under for hours seemed to shift slightly. In certain areas, he noticed faint hints of tone, soft blues and greens appearing in places where the environment should have been completely colorless. It didn't make sense based on everything they had been trained to expect. Duke looked over at Young. According to his account, Young was seeing something similar. They didn't ignore it. They followed procedure and reported the observation back to Houston. Mission Control did not offer any explanation. They were instructed to continue the mission as planned. Then came a second moment in the same general area. On the moon, sound should not exist in the normal sense. With no atmosphere, there is nothing to carry sound waves. The only audio astronauts receive comes through their radio systems or through vibrations traveling through their suits and equipment. But Duke later recalled that in this region, both he and Young experienced something unusual. Through their helmet audio, they heard tones that did not match normal radio communication or static interference. He described them as structured, almost rhythmic sounds, something that felt organized but had no identifiable source. Again, they reported it to Houston. Again, there was no clear explanation, and once more, they were told to continue. The third observation, as Duke described it, involved time itself. During parts of the second EVA, he noticed moments where his sense of timing didn't fully match what the instruments were showing. Tasks that should have taken several minutes felt shorter, almost compressed. But when he checked the mission timers, everything was accurate. The recorded time never changed. Only his internal perception felt slightly out of sync. This stood out to him because he was not someone unfamiliar with stress or disorientation. He was a trained test pilot, someone used to operating under pressure where focus and discipline mattered most. Yet, even with that background, he could not fully explain this shift in perception. Young, according to Duke, experienced similar impressions during the same period. Despite these moments, the mission continued normally according to all official data. Then came another observation that stood out even more. While moving across the surface in the rover, Duke noticed something on the horizon. At first, it appeared to be a simple ridge or uneven rock formation, something completely ordinary for lunar terrain. But as they got closer, the visual details began to change. Straight edges, sharp angles, lines that did not blend the way natural rock formations usually do. The closer they approached, the harder it became to interpret it as random geology. Duke pointed it out to Young. Without discussion, they diverted from their planned route and drove the rover approximately 200 meters toward it. As they got closer, it did not resolve into anything natural. Duke describes what they were looking at as a wall or foundation structure roughly 100 meters long, composed of large blocks arranged in a pattern that was clearly deliberate. This was not something the moon produced on its own. It had been put there. Duke and Young stopped the rover approximately 50 meters away. They radioed Houston with a full description of what they were seeing. Then they requested permission to move closer and begin detailed photography. Houston went silent. Duke admits the time distortion they had been experiencing in that area makes the actual duration difficult to measure. When the response finally came, the voice on the line was not their usual Capcom. It was someone more senior. The words were, "Do not approach the structure more closely. Photograph it from your current position. Then proceed immediately to the designated sampling site." Whatever Duke and Young were looking at, Mission Control had already decided what to do with it. Duke raised his camera and photographed it. The image was not perfectly sharp because the figure was in motion and they were observing from approximately 50 meters away. But the shape was there, in the frame, upright, distinct against the lunar surface, separated from the structure beside it, unmistakably. Not a rock, not a shadow, not any piece of equipment from the Apollo mission. He spent 50 years building a reputation as one of the most reliable and disciplined people in the history of space exploration. He knows exactly what this admission costs him. Anyway, when Duke returned to Earth and went through the mission photography during debriefing, the photographs of the structure were not there. He was told they were being held for technical analysis. Without those images, his account becomes something any official spokesperson can dismiss as the faded memory of an old man. That is exactly what a cover-up requires. Remove the physical evidence, and the witness has nothing left but his word. Duke is not alone in suggesting that Apollo found more than it reported. Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon during Apollo 14, spent his later years publicly saying that governments are hiding evidence of non-human contact. He insisted this was not just speculation or imagination from a retired astronaut. Mitchell held a doctorate from MIT and had spent his career inside one of the most classified programs in human history. While returning from the moon, Mitchell described experiencing what he called a sudden shift in perspective. He said it felt like a deep realization that the universe is somehow connected or intelligent, and he spoke about a powerful feeling of unity with everything around him. In later years, Mitchell stated he was 100% sure that extraterrestrial life existed, and the logic behind that decision is straightforward once you accept what Duke and Mitchell are describing. Every mission back to the moon risks another discovery, another set of photographs that have to be pulled from the record, another crew that comes home knowing something they are not allowed to say. According to Duke, what he experienced during those 71 hours on and around the moon convinced him that ending the program was not about money. It was about control over information that would raise questions humanity was not ready to answer.